Leverage is a mechanical equation. It requires a fulcrum, and it requires a hostage. In the architecture of human conflict, the opponent almost never holds a physical blade to your throat. Instead, they hold your psychological comfort hostage. They hold your status, your reputation, and your primal addiction to survival. They calculate their strategy based on a single, universally accepted assumption: that you will flinch when faced with the void. Strip away the hostage, and the weapon shatters. Do not retreat. The architecture of your hesitation is about to be completely shattered. Endure this forge until the final frame, and you will leave with the iron required to conquer. Secure your position in the daily motivation library by subscribing now. Those who break early remain prey.
The modern mind is infected with a pathological desperation to survive at any cost. We have been conditioned to accept daily microscopic acts of dishonor just to maintain a baseline of passive comfort. We apologize when we are right. We yield the high ground to avoid friction. We endure the slow, agonizing erosion of our own will, terrified of systemic collapse. This is the gravity of average men. It is the psychology of the prey. The warrior does not operate within this geometry. The samurai archetype, forged in the absolute severing of internal weakness, understands that there is a fate infinitely worse than the final exile. That fate is psychological ruin, the betrayal of the internal code, dishonor. He who fears the void can be controlled by anyone who threatens to push him into it. He who accepts the void can never be leveraged.
We do not deal in abstract poetry. We deal in the cold, unvarnished mechanics of historical power. To understand this leverage, we must extract the truth from the blood-rusted dirt of 1615. The Summer Siege of Osaka. The physical reality is bleak. Sanada Yukimura, a tactician of uncompromising discipline, faces the unstoppable war machine of Tokugawa Ieyasu. The Tokugawa forces number over 150,000. Sanada commands a fraction of that strength. The mathematics of the battlefield dictate absolute erasure. Tokugawa operates on standard strategic logic. He expects a siege. He expects the defenders to calculate their odds, recognize the impossibility of survival, and negotiate a surrender. He expects Sanada to value his breath over his code. But Sanada has already mentally executed himself. He operates under the doctrine later codified in the Hagakure by Yamamoto Tsunetomo. The way of the warrior is found in the absolute, deliberate acceptance of the final exile. Every morning, the warrior must mentally simulate his own destruction. He must see his armor shattered, his body broken, his existence erased. By voluntarily stepping into the void before the battle even begins, the psychological tax of fear is completely paid in full.
Sanada does not wait behind the walls. He does not negotiate for a soft exit. He dons crimson armor, a massive, bloody focal point against the dust of the battlefield, and launches a charge of such terrifying violence that it breaks the laws of tactical probability. He drives his vanguard directly at Tokugawa's central command. He does not fight to survive. He fights to inflict maximum psychological ruin upon the enemy. His men tear through multiple defensive lines, forcing the supreme commander, Tokugawa himself, to flee his own camp in a state of absolute panic. Sanada falls, eventually facing the final exile, but the structural integrity of his opponent's leverage was utterly annihilated. Tokugawa feared the void. Sanada weaponized it. A man who does not care if he returns from the battlefield cannot be bribed, intimidated, or broken.
This transmission targets the modern male architecture. You have been sold the pathetic illusion that pacification equals peace. Society demands your domestication. It extracts your labor and rewards you with numbing comfort. You are praised for your harmlessness. Harmlessness is not morality. It is a vulnerability. To wield the samurai's ultimatum, you must forge an internal violence so controlled and absolute that the external world senses the friction. You must integrate the monster, as Carl Jung mapped. You do not wait for conditions to improve. You become the condition. You weaponize the crushing burden of expectation and convert it into the physical manifestation of the will to power. You become the immovable object against which the gravity of average men shatters.
This transmission targets the female architecture. The world expects your compliance. It attempts to leverage your inherent biological drive for harmony to force your submission. They equate your grace with weakness. This is their fatal strategic miscalculation. We extract the truth from the blood-rusted dirt of Aizu, 1868. Nakano Takeko and the Onimusha. They did not wait to be rescued. They did not negotiate with the invading imperial forces who expected their quiet surrender. They armed themselves, accepted the final exile, and shattered the enemy's vanguard. They proved that absolute sovereignty is not a gendered construct. It is a forged reality. You must engineer a psychological fortress. Let them underestimate your silence. When they attempt to maneuver you into the trap of social pleasing, you strike with the cold, unyielding boundary of a drawn blade. Your honor is not defined by how much you can endure for others, but by the absolute limits of what you refuse to tolerate. You are the velvet predator.
This is not a myth, it is a biological reality. Let us dissect the anatomy of the iron will. The human amygdala is hardwired to prioritize survival. When confronted with the threat of absolute erasure, whether physical, financial, or social, the nervous system is flooded with cortisol. The brain screams for capitulation. The weak self demands surrender to alleviate the agonizing pressure. But neuroplasticity is the anvil, and extreme discipline is the hammer. Through the repeated voluntary exposure to extreme friction, the warrior forcibly rewrites his own neurochemistry. This is the physiological manifestation of Friedrich Nietzsche's will to power. The dopamine baseline is recalibrated. The brain ceases to reward passive safety and begins to reward the execution of deliberate, agonizing effort. You train the nervous system to remain clinical in the face of the abyss. As Miyamoto Musashi recorded in The Book of Five Rings, the warrior's spiritual bearing in the chaos of combat must not deviate a fraction of an inch from his bearing in everyday life. The body is a blade. The mind is the grip. If the grip is weak, the blade shatters upon impact. Yukio Mishima understood the unbearable beauty of this reality. He understood that the physical form and the internal code must be hammered into a single, unified entity. Modern society attempts to separate the two, preaching that thoughts alone define a man. This is a fatal delusion. A code that has never bled is just a theory. A philosophy that has never been tested against the absolute threat of the void is nothing but academic dust. Honor is not a passive state. It is an active, violent refusal to compromise the internal citadel.
We bring this weapon into the 2026 arena. The battlefields have changed, but the physics of power remain mathematically identical. In the high-stakes architecture of modern negotiation, corporate strategy, and social dominance, your adversaries are constantly hunting for your pressure points. They probe your defenses, looking for the one thing you are terrified to lose. They want to find your fear of poverty, your fear of isolation, your fear of social erasure. Robert Greene maps this predatory mechanism flawlessly. The manipulator requires you to be invested in the outcome. They require you to cling to the illusion of safety. They apply pressure to your status, expecting you to fold. They offer you a path of least resistance, a way out that requires only a small, microscopic concession of your honor. This is the trap. The moment you concede a fraction of your code to preserve your comfort, systemic collapse is inevitable. You have proven that you have a price. But when you deploy the samurai's ultimatum, the matrix of their strategy violently disintegrates. When the opponent applies pressure, and you look back at them with the cold, detached eyes of a grandmaster who has already accepted the loss of everything, their leverage evaporates. If they threaten your capital, you show them you are prepared to build from the dirt. If they threaten your reputation, you show them you do not require the validation of sheep. If they threaten you with absolute erasure, you show them you fear the betrayal of your own iron code infinitely more than you fear the void. You do not argue. You do not explain yourself. You simply refuse to flinch. The psychological shock inflicted upon a manipulator who realizes their target cannot be threatened is absolute. They are left holding an empty scabbard. They realize with sudden, suffocating clarity that they are locked in a room with an individual who is willing to outlast them in the flames.
And this is where the dark crucible gives way to the light. This is the dawn after the siege. When you finally stop running from the fear of loss, when you stand your ground and look directly into the abyss, the heavy, suffocating weight of anxiety is instantly severed. There is a profound, explosive liberation in having nothing left to protect but your honor. It is the ascension from prey to apex predator. It is the realization of absolute, untouchable sovereignty. You no longer move through the world playing defense. You are no longer managing risks or hiding from consequence. You have forged an internal architecture so rigid, so deeply anchored in reality, that external forces simply break against it. The air becomes clean. The vision becomes terrifyingly sharp. This is the roar of the forge. The heat of the crucible was agonizing, but the steel that emerges is unbreakable. You realize that the discipline was not a punishment. It was the mechanism of your liberation. You have secured the high ground of your own mind. You have reclaimed your power from the hands of the architects who sought to keep you docile. You are no longer a participant in their game. You are the immovable object. The fear of the final exile is the heaviest chain worn by modern man. Shatter that chain, and you become a force of nature. You become the storm itself.
The trial is complete. If this truth exposed a fracture in your armor, leave your oath in the comments. Reinforce the line by liking this transmission and subscribe to Daily Motivation Library to secure your next weapon. The war is raging whether you draw your sword or not. Stand ready.